My father was Ismael Zambada Garcia. In the underworld they called him El Mayo. Power, money, corruption, these things don't just build empires, they create enemies. Because in this world no one is ever satisfied watching someone else rise. And that's how wars begin. By the early 1990s Mexico was sitting on a ticking bomb. Just a few years earlier the most powerful figures in the country were still sitting at the same table, working together, making billions. They had built a system that worked with precision. Colombians supplied the product. Mexicans moved it north. Everyone got rich. Everyone followed the rules. But systems like that don't collapse overnight. They crack slowly, quietly, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's already too late. At the center of it all were two forces that would soon collide. On one side the Sinaloa faction, built on patience, logistics, and long-term strategy. On the other the Arellano Felix organization, a group that controlled one of the most important gateways in the world. Tijuana. This wasn't just another city, it was the door to California. Whoever controlled the door controlled millions of dollars every single week. And the Arellano Felix brothers understood that better than anyone. They didn't just control Tijuana. They owned it. Every street, every checkpoint, every route leading to the border. Nothing moved without their approval. Nothing crossed without a tax. And that tax wasn't small. Hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, paid weekly just to guarantee safe passage. Police were paid. Soldiers were paid. Politicians were paid. The system was airtight. And for a while, it worked perfectly. But power changes people. And the more power the brothers gained, the more they demanded. What started as a fee turned into control. What started as cooperation turned into dominance. And that's when the cracks began to show. Because there was one man who refused to accept that system. Joaquin Guzman. El Chapo didn't come from power. He didn't inherit connections. He built everything from nothing. And because of that, he didn't believe in following someone else's rules. At first his actions seemed small. Minor violations. Moving shipments quietly. Avoiding attention. But then the scale increased. More shipments. More routes. More money moving through Tijuana without paying a single dollar to the people who controlled it. And that wasn't just business, that was disrespect. At first the Arellano brothers didn't react. They watched. They observed. They kept track of everything. Every kilo. Every dollar lost. Every time their authority was ignored. And the number kept growing. But they were patient. Because in their world, timing is everything. And when they decided to act, it wouldn't be a warning. It would be final. El Chapo knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. By refusing to pay, he wasn't just saving money. He was challenging their power. And in that world, power is everything. But Chapo wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Hector Palma, a man shaped by violence, driven by loyalty, and capable of extreme brutality when pushed. Together they began building something different. A network that didn't depend on approval. A system that could operate independently. And slowly, quietly, they started creating an alternative to the old structure. Meanwhile in the shadows another figure watched everything unfold. Ismael Zambada Garcia. El Mayo was different. He didn't seek attention. He didn't chase headlines. He built his empire slowly, methodically, with patience most people in that world didn't have. While others showed their power, Mayo hid it. While others fought for dominance, Mayo focused on survival. But his influence was everywhere. For years he had worked closely with the Arellano brothers. Their relationship wasn't just business, it was personal. Families knew each other. Deals were based on trust. But even the strongest relationships have limits, and those limits were being tested. Because the brothers were changing, their ambitions were growing, and their demands were becoming impossible to ignore. They didn't just want control of Tijuana, they wanted control over everyone who operated near it, including their allies. Taxes increased, pressure increased, and slowly, the balance began to break. Mayo saw it coming. He understood that when power becomes absolute, conflict becomes inevitable. But he didn't act immediately, because Mayo didn't rush into war. He waited, he observed, he calculated. Meanwhile tensions continued to rise. Old conflicts resurfaced. One of Chapo's closest allies had already been killed by the Tijuana faction. It wasn't forgotten. In that world nothing ever is. And then everything escalated. Hector Palma became the target of one of the most brutal attacks the underworld had ever seen. His family was used against him. Manipulated, betrayed, destroyed. It wasn't just violence, it was psychological, a message designed to break him completely. In that world there are rules, unwritten but understood by everyone, and one of those rules is simple. You don't touch family. That line had been crossed completely, and once that happens, there's no negotiation left. only revenge. Palma changed after that. The man who once focused on business became consumed by rage, and Chapo understood exactly what that meant. This wasn't about territory anymore. It was personal. By 1991, the system that once held everything together had completely collapsed. The Plaza Agreements meant nothing. Territories were ignored. Alliances were broken. Everyone moved wherever they wanted, and violence became the only way to enforce control. Tijuana turned into a battlefield. Shootings in daylight, explosions at night, bodies left as warnings. The streets became messages, and the message was clear. The war had begun. In the middle of it all, Mayo tried to maintain balance. He knew that open war would destroy everything. Routes would collapse. Profits would disappear. Governments would intervene. And once that happens, everyone loses. But even he couldn't stop what was coming. The pressure kept building. The violence kept escalating. And then it reached his own family. An attempt was made on his son's life. Shots fired. A clear signal. No one was safe anymore. At that moment, neutrality was no longer possible. Mayo had to choose. And he chose. He aligned with Chapo and Palma, not because he wanted war, but because he understood it was already happening. From that moment, the lines were drawn. Sinaloa on one side, Tijuana on the other. And what followed wasn't just conflict. It was transformation. The old system was gone. In its place came chaos, rival groups, competing networks, constant violence, each side adapting, each side evolving. The Arellano brothers expanded aggressively. They recruited differently. Instead of traditional criminals, they brought in young men from wealthy families, narco juniors, men who weren't driven by necessity, but by thrill, power, status, and that made them unpredictable, dangerous in a different way. Meanwhile, Sinaloa adapted through logistics. They built routes everywhere, tunnels under borders, hidden airstrips, coastal deliveries. Redundancy became their strength. If one route failed, another opened, and slowly they gained ground. The war escalated year by year. Every attack answered, every loss repaid. The violence spread beyond cities into entire regions. And with every escalation, the stakes grew higher. More money, more power, more blood. But none of them fully understood what they had created. Because wars like this don't end quickly. They evolve, they spread, they become part of the system itself. And once that happens, they can't be stopped, only continued. The conflict between Sinaloa and Tijuana didn't just change those organizations. It changed everything. It reshaped the structure of organized crime in Mexico. It created new alliances, new enemies, new strategies, and its impact would be felt for decades. Even today, the echoes of that war remain. Because once a war like this begins, it never truly ends. It just changes form. But what most people never saw was what came after the explosion, because wars don't just destroy your enemies, they change the people fighting them. By the mid-1990s, the lines between strategy and survival had completely disappeared. What started as calculated moves had turned into instinct. Every decision was faster, colder, more permanent. Joaquin Guzman was no longer just challenging a system, he was becoming something else entirely. A man who didn't just break rules, but rewrote them. His operations expanded beyond anything the old structure had imagined. New corridors opened through Sonora, hidden crossings multiplied along the Arizona border, entire routes appeared where none had existed before, and every time the Arellano Felix organization tried to shut one down, two more would replace it. It wasn't just resistance anymore, it was evolution. At the same time, Hector Palma had crossed a point of no return. The pain he carried wasn't something that faded, it sharpened him, focused him, turned every operation into something precise, but ruthless. Where others saw targets, Palma saw messages. Every response had to be louder, every action had to be remembered, because in that world fear wasn't a byproduct, it was currency. And then there was Ismael Zambada Garcia. While chaos spread, Mayo stayed exactly the same, calm, invisible, patient. But don't mistake silence for inaction. Behind the scenes, Mayo was doing something far more dangerous than fighting. He was building stability inside instability. While others burned bridges, he created quiet understandings. While others escalated violence, he reduced risk where it mattered most. His network didn't just survive the war, it adapted to it faster than anyone else. He understood something the others didn't yet fully grasp. This war wasn't going to be won by force alone, it would be won by endurance, and endurance required discipline. Meanwhile, the Arellano Felix brothers doubled down. Tijuana remained their fortress, but fortresses come with a weakness. The more you rely on one stronghold, the more vulnerable you become everywhere else. Their control was still absolute inside the city, but outside, pressure was building. Every intercepted shipment, every lost route, every betrayal, it added up, and trust started to disappear, because wars like this don't just create enemies, they create doubt inside their own organization. Cracks began to form. The narco juniors they had recruited brought energy, but not loyalty. They weren't raised in the same world, they didn't understand the weight of consequences, they chased adrenaline, not stability, and that made them unpredictable. Reckless decisions started costing more than money. They started costing control. At the same time, the Mexican government could no longer ignore what was happening. The scale of violence had reached a level that threatened more than just rival groups. It was attracting international attention. Pressure from the United States increased, cooperation between agencies intensified, and suddenly, this wasn't just a war between cartels anymore. It was a war being watched, and when that happens, the rules change again. Because now survival doesn't just depend on defeating your enemy. It depends on staying invisible while doing it, and that is where everything begins to shift again.